Hi everyone, this is Ali John Chaudhary, psychotherapist, and today I'm here with Fern Schumer Chapman, author. And today we have an exciting episode because we're going to be talking about personal dignity forfeited in chasing. Now, what if there was a particular pattern within sibling estrangement that can be especially responsible for affecting our self esteem and our personal dignity? Wouldn't we want to become conscious of it and stop doing it? In this important episode, we'll be exploring how chasing a distant sibling can cause us to give up much of ourselves and self-erase to our own detriment. So, Fern, it's great to have you here.
Yeah, great to be here. This is a real tendency when there is a narcissist in the mix because they tend to be very dominating personalities. We desperately want their connection and love, and we will do anything, including walking on eggshells, to maintain that relationship. And it's a tough choice whether you're willing to compromise so much of yourself that you're now inauthentic, just to maintain the relationship.
Mm-hmm. It's so important, right? To recognize that and how a lot of us have to walk through this role just to buy the peace. But yet at the same time, it comes at a great cost to us, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Probably too great a cost.
Right? Exactly. So, what does it look like when it comes to chasing? I think that as empaths, we may seek to work harder at fostering relationships. And if we're not careful, we can risk in taking on the brunt of the work in a relationship, like you and I were talking about before, right? Living with an estranged sibling or in a tense relationship with one can lead to habitual self suppression, choosing silence, compliance, or withdrawal just for the sake of the relationship. And this type of self erasing can become excessive and turn into compounded compromise, in which our needs may become so watered down that our high adaptability can cause us to tolerate situations that are not to be tolerated, or worse, chase a sibling that continuously pulls away.
It's interesting. The research bears this out too. The studies on ostracism, especially by Kipling Williams. Ostracism instigates actions aimed at recovering thwarted needs of belonging, self-esteem, control, and meaningful existence. So you're going to do things that you're desperate because you're desperate to maintain balance and recover the balance.
Mm-hmm. You're absolutely right. And I think that this cat and mouse game can become painful over time, as
Right.
we'll see, right? And I think with any type of behavior, if done enough times, they may become normalized and turn potentially into a trauma bond.
Right. And I think when you have a narcissist in the mix, you have a really high likelihood of having a trauma bond.
Especially, and that's the thing that we need to look out for. So, what does it make us feel, right? That's an important question as well, I think, for some of our viewers, right? There's a sense of betrayal in terms of how we can be treated despite our best efforts. And it's normal that if we think that we do good, that good things will happen. And for some siblings that exhibit emotional immaturity or who relish in control, this can really leave us feeling bewildered and disillusioned.
Well, and there's more to it than that, even that you start to believe what they're saying and buy in, and you have this whole self-gaslighting pattern where their perceptions are more valid than your own.
Mm-hmm. That's a big one too, I think, right? Because a lot of times, if you tend to do this over time, that can turn into resentment and giving yourself up, right? Because your needs never get met. And you can adapt and adapt, but if you're always the one giving up, there's a sense of feeling less important than your sibling, or worse, in not being enough.
Right. And then you get labeled with you're overreactive or you're too sensitive and you're making too big a deal out of it. And
Mhm.
that's where you start to think, oh, am I too sensitive?
Right?
Am I making too big a deal out of this?
Mm-hmm. That's the risk, isn't it? And I think chasing diminishes our sense of well-being and authenticity, right? If we're constantly giving more importance to other people's feelings and emotions, like we're saying, that reciprocity can be what we hope for ourselves. But the only thing, though, is that our turn never comes, and or very seldomly. And I think that this is what really causes our hopes to be dashed because we tend to accept breadcrumbs as we go through the roller coaster of incremental validation.
Yeah, I think you have to ask yourself some pretty tough questions when it comes to all this. Like, what can you actually control in this situation? Did you do, what did you do that actually resulted in this outcome? And are you responsible for how someone else feels or thinks about a situation or someone?
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And that's really, really important to explore that fully to be able to understand the big picture. And I think that over time, this internal suppression can really cause anxiety. You and I have talked about low self esteem as well, and emotional burnout as well. I think that that's really important because a lot of times we may think that we're adapting to a situation, but really what ends up happening is that everything we may say or do is not enough to be able to satisfy the strange sibling and such,
And that's the roots of people pleasing.
right?
Yeah,
Exactly.
that's where you start to get into this whole fawning behavior.
Yep.
Again, the trauma response.
Exactly, right? So what can we do? I think it's important for our viewers to understand and to maybe look at how they can continue to empower themselves. So some key steps to disrupt the cycle could be, for example, to shadow your instincts, right? Start by recognizing what and when you're minimizing or silencing yourself to keep the peace. That's really, really important to notice. Oh, okay, what am I putting away? What am I tossing aside here exactly, right?
Yeah, I think labeling is a really good idea. So words like minimizing or invalidation might be really helpful because you can even write it down and put a category of minimization and where it happened and why it happened so that you start to actually map this thing out.
Yeah, exactly. And also building self-awareness like we're describing here, right? Tuning in to how self-erasing behaviors show up, how we tend to maybe shrink at conflict, maybe losing enthusiasm for shared activities, or even downplaying our opinions as well, what we tend to bury within ourselves or tend to cast aside or dismiss and such, right? Really being careful about that inner process of what happens in putting ourselves away at our own expense.
And when do you have difficulty saying no?
Mm-hmm.
And that's
Exactly.
a good question to ask yourself because that'll probably show you where you're compromising.
Exactly. So really what you're describing is to practice a form of assertive communication as well, right? In small steps, you can learn to voice your preferences, express your feelings calmly, or like you said, say no respectfully. And I think these micro assertions can help to rebuild trust in your own needs as well, especially by honoring and upholding that to some level.
This is really difficult, though, for people who have never been modeled good communication skills. And
Mhm.
so you have to do it as a do-it-yourself project. And it's tricky to learn how to talk to somebody authentically. The tendency is to avoid or to ignore, and that gets you nowhere.
Exactly, right. And I think that, like you said, it can be very overwhelming if you have to work on many different areas. But I think always starting with small goals can be important, right? Learning to say no, for example, can be its own goal unto itself, especially, right? Because a lot of times when we're highly agreeable, the problems only start sometimes when you start to disagree. And I think at the same time there are healthy no's to be said. I think it's important when you do say no that you can, of course, have that experience of at least speaking your truth, right?
What happens though in people who have never had good communication skills modeled is they never learn what is an acceptable boundary.
Mm-hmm.
And what you're talking about is trying to discern where you can say no and when, how to say no.
Yeah, exactly. Which is really important. So giving yourself small goals in that respect can be helpful going into communication if you're still interacting with your estranged sibling and such on some level. And the next step would be, of course, honoring small wins, right? Celebrating times when you choose yourself, right? Speaking up, for example, as we're saying, setting a boundary, or refusing to be sidelined. And these moments chip away at old patterns, which is very important in highlighting the successes.
So you might write in your gratitude journal those three things you did today where you felt you were your authentic self.
Hmm. Yeah, that's a great example right there, you know? So important to be able to look at that and such, right? And to give yourself praise as well, right? To give yourself a recognition of your qualities and what's important for you. And even if you don't necessarily say something to your estranged sibling, even writing it down, what you think is important in that particular communication can still have value because it's acknowledged by you.
Right.
So important. So the long-term benefits of avoiding self-erasure are, of course, increased self-worth and clarity about what you need from any relationship, and not just with siblings, which transfers into reaffirming your identity and having a good balance between your emotions and your thinking.
Right. All of this ripples out into your larger social connections.
Mhm.
And you find yourself more confident and true to yourself and more comfortable in life.
Absolutely. And healing generalizes itself in other areas. I think that's really, really important, right? We develop greater inner resilience and protection against manipulation, guilt, or emotional gaslighting as well. So we've talked about how it is sometimes when we run into a narcissist, for example, how it is that we never forget the experience because it helps us to see it now from far away if ever it happens again that we meet somebody like that.
Right. The great quote that I've heard so many times in your groups, once you see it, you can't unsee it.
Exactly right. So I think in general, I think that oftentimes, you know, it's important to recognize that we have a healthier sense of self that fosters more genuine, balanced connections as opposed to taking on too much responsibility and personalizing. So that's really, really important when it comes to some of the benefits that
Right.
happen, I think.
That word personalization is key because so much of this comes from taking on what's not yours.
Hmm. Very much so. So important to be mindful of that. So, Fern, we're almost out of time. So, let's talk about resources. What would be your number one resource at this time?
So, writing things down, the Sibling Estrangement Journal offers that opportunity through prompts, and you can assess where you've been inauthentic and where you have been erasing yourself.
That is a great resource. I highly recommend it. So I think that also a good resource on my part, a couple of resources I want to mention are, of course, the Sibling Estrangement Support Group on Zoom that happens. It's going to happen again this fall. I'm taking a break for the summer for that. But people can contact me if they'd be interested in learning more about this. And also, there's the intensive workshop I have, a one session workshop on managing rumination and such. So I'm offering a cutting edge approach when it comes to dealing with that hasn't been discussed or put into practice within the estrangement community. So that's going to be important. And I'm going to be starting up a grief support group on sibling estrangement. There's going to be something that I'm going to be building for this fall as well. And that should be two sessions, I believe, in terms of the format. So people can get in touch with me if they want with regards to some of these important resources to help to deepen the process of healing and harmonization within ourselves.
Yeah, I think that rumination often does come from self-erasure too.
Yeah,
When
yeah,
you feel you're
100%.
inauthentic, you're constantly searching for how to get out of this mess.
Exactly right. And I think that's really, really important to be mindful of that. So, Fern, this has been a great episode. I'm really, really happy we were able to discuss
Yeah,
this particular topic on personal dignity forfeited in chasing. I think it's so important that we highlight this and, of course, bring this to the consciousness and to the forefront for our viewers. And I very much look forward to our next episodes together again. And of course, our shared mutual cooperation as we always do on this important subject.
great. It'll be great. We'll regroup in the fall.
Absolutely. So you take care, Fern. I'll talk to you soon.
Bye.
Bye bye.